let's come up with a view about the content of imaginative episodes. I'll talk a little bit about what kind of imagination I'm referring to when I say imaginative episodes. And then let's apply that view about the content of imaginative episodes to a number of puzzles in philosophy. One of them is the paradox of fiction. So that's what I want to present here today. Because of that structure, because of the view about the imagination is the central part, and then the application is the paradox of fiction, the thesis is a conditional thesis. Is if you give me a certain view about the imagination, then I can give you a certain solution to a puzzle in aesthetics, the paradox of fiction. Now, the problem with this conditional thesis is that if you pack too much into the antecedent, then it's not very interesting, right? I cannot tell you, concede to me the view about the imagination, and then I'll give you a solution about the paradox of fiction. I don't need to argue for the antecedent. I just ask you, if you give me that, then I'll give you the solution. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is present the puzzle that we need to solve, the puzzle in aesthetics, the paradox of fiction, but then I'll motivate, I'll tell you what the view about the imagination that is supposed to solve that puzzle is, and I'll try to motivate it. I'll try to defend it. Maybe not enough much detail as the talk was about that, but in enough detail so you can see that it's not a crazy view. And then finally, I'll go back to the paradox in aesthetics, the paradox of fiction, and try to show you how, if the view about the imagination is right, then you can get the solution. All right. Now, what is the paradox of fiction? It's the easiest way to formulate it is as an inconsistent triad, as a set of three claims, each of which seems independently plausible, and yet when you put them together, you realize the three of them cannot be right at the same time. What are the three claims? One is that we have emotions towards fictional characters when you engage with fiction. I mean, you don't walk around having emotions towards, I don't know, Oliver Swift or whatever. But when you engage with fiction, when you get the book and then you read it, then you develop emotions towards those fictional characters. The second claim is that you don't believe that those fictional characters are real, right? If you're reading Anna Karenina or whatever, you don't think that Anna Karenina is real. And the third thing is like, well, hold on, but you shouldn't have emotions towards things that you don't believe are real. You don't go around like feeling sad or angry or happy for things that, I don't know, the Easter Bunny or something that you don't believe is real. Maybe kids do, but kids believe it's real, right? All right, so here's an example. Suppose you're reading Dracula. Instead of Anna Karenina, I tried to come up with a more fun example. You're reading Dracula, and you're reading the scene where Harker gets to the castle. He just arrived there. There's dinner prepared for him, and the Count arrives, and the Count is having a conversation with him, hearing the wolves in the forest, going like, "Oh, the children of the night," and all that. And you're reading the scene, and you're afraid for Harker. You're afraid of Dracula. So it's plausible to think that you're experiencing fear of Dracula when you're reading that scene, but you don't believe that Dracula is real, and we don't have emotions towards things that we don't believe in, right? Again, it may be that we have emotions towards things that are actually not real, but we need to at least believe that they're real. And in this case, you don't believe that Dracula is real. So how come are you afraid? Right? If you don't like books, you can do this for movies. You can, think about, I don't know, some horror movie, and then you're horrified of the monster, and you know very well that the monster doesn't exist. How is that possible? Now, one of the possibilities, so what I want to do now is give you a taste. The literature on this is huge, so I just want to give you a taste of some different positions, so that, and there's a point in doing this. The point is to see that there's a certain trade-off between the different positions. Some positions that try to push in one direction have some virtues and some problems. Positions that push in a different direction have the opposite virtues and problems. And that's hopefully will motivate the idea that a different kind of position is necessary, which is going to be the one I want to propose. So here's some possible options. One is you can try to challenge it. You can say, it's actually not true that we don't believe these characters are real. This is pretty much a non-starter, but I want to get it out of the way. How could you possibly argue something like this? Like, surely you don't believe that Dracula is real. So you can say, well, fictional characters are abstract entities, like kinds or sorts or properties. So you don't believe that Dracula is real, but maybe you believe that the compound of all the properties that Dracula has, like being a monster and sucking blood and not being able to stand sunlight, these are properties. Properties are abstract entities. Those things are real. You could say something like that. The problem with that position is that, yeah, but you don't have emotions towards abstract entities. So it's not going to help you. It's not going to help you explain why you're afraid when you read Dracula, because you don't have emotions towards abstract entities any more than you have emotions towards things that you don't believe are real. So even if abstract entities like kinds of sets of properties are real, that's not the kind of thing of which you are afraid. So that's not going to help. You could say, well, they're real in the sense that they're abstract objects, sorry, they're concrete objects. We're talking about the guy, Dracula. And for a moment, you momentarily think that you're being confronted with that object when you are reading the fiction. This is called in the literature and aesthetics the suspension of disbelief position. For a moment, when you read fiction, you don't remain neutral on whether or not the things that you're reading about are real or not. For a moment, you actually believe that they're real. This seems quite impossible, but even if, well, look, it's impossible because you can't attribute to somebody the belief that Dracula is real, even for a moment when they're reading the novel. They don't behave as if it's real. They don't express the belief. They don't say Dracula is real. They don't report it. They don't say, I believe that Dracula is real. So it seems quite impossible to attribute to somebody, even for a moment, the belief that Dracula is real. Now, the most promising way of challenging too is to say they're concrete objects and they don't exist in this world, but they exist in some other possible world. There's a possible world in which Harker is conversing with Dracula, and what fiction does is it gives you access, cognitive access to that world. They're over there, and we're over here, but they exist over there. Now, this does give you a way of challenging 2, but it doesn't help because 3 then can be reformulated. So instead of real, imagine that it says exists in the actual world. And then you can say, hold on, we do believe that fictional character, exists in some possible world. And then you can say, hold on, we do believe that fictional characters exist in some possible world. So we can challenge 2. But then somebody could say, yeah, but 3 is now, it's reformulate 3 in terms of we don't have emotions towards things that we don't believe exist in the actual world, right? The fact that Dracula is over there in some other possible world shouldn't make me afraid of anything. The only things I should be afraid of are the things that are happening in this world. There's a wrinkle here. It's true that sometimes we say, I'm afraid of something that could happen to me. Like, I'm afraid that a serial killer could be waiting for me in my hotel room. And it seems natural to read that as saying, well, there's a possible world in which the serial killer is waiting for you. Surely there is a possible world where he is waiting for me. But that's not what I'm afraid of. Right? Why? Because when I open the door in the actual world, I open the door of my room and I see that there's nobody there, then I'm not afraid anymore. Even though if I'm perfectly aware that there's some other possible world where the serial killer is there. So it seems natural to read 3 as well. We don't have emotions towards things that we don't believe exist in the actual world. And that is the problem, that even if you think that Dracula is real in the sense that he exists in some other possible world, you don't believe he exists in the actual world. So how come are you having an emotion to it? So none of these ways of trying to challenge 2 seems to help. So the other options are, well, we either challenge 1 and say we don't have emotions towards fictional characters. We have something else. We're in some other kind of psychological state. Or we challenge 3 and we say that requirement that in order to have an emotion towards something, you need to believe that the thing is real. That's way too strong. So forget about fiction, the requirement, there's other cases to suggest that the requirement is too strong, drop it, and we'll be fine. So let's explore those 2 options. Suppose you do the first thing and you say, you don't really have emotions, you're not really afraid when you read Dracula and you read about the scene with Harker. All right, so here's, I'm going to use the whiteboard. It's a bit too tricky to get there. I think I can do it. So here's what's not in dispute. What's not in dispute, I'm trying to be fair to everyone in this debate. What's not in dispute is that when you read Dracula, for example, you have some physiological changes, adrenaline goes up, heartbeat goes up, the muscles are in tension, the physiological changes that you would associate with being afraid, experiencing the emotion of fear. It's also not in dispute that you undergo some phenomenological changes. You have some feelings that you associate with the emotion of fear. Now, what's in dispute is whether that's enough for an emotion. Some people, and this is the classical view in philosophy, viewing people like Hume or Locke, they think of emotions as sentiments. So we could call this sentimentalism about emotion. The idea is, look, as long as you have the feelings, that core part, that's it, that's the emotion. Some people think, no, there's something on the coast side of those feelings and physiological changes that is necessary for the emotion. That's going to be important now. What is it that it needs to cause those feelings and those physiological changes? Beliefs about the object of the emotion. So the idea is, in order for you to believe that, in order for you to be afraid of Dracula, it's not enough that you have a certain feeling and that your heartbeat goes up and whatever. You need to have some beliefs about the properties of Dracula, namely that Dracula is dangerous. In order for you to be, I don't know, angry at Chris, for example, it's not enough that, my muscles are in tension and I'm ready to punch or something. I also need to have a certain belief holding that, namely the belief that Chris has wronged me in some way. He has done something wrong to me, etc. In order for me to feel pride for something that I've done, I need to believe the feelings that I'm feeling when I feel pride need to be caused by the belief that that kind of thing was worth doing or something. At the very least, that I'm responsible for the thing that has been done. So there's certain beliefs that need to cause, beliefs about the properties of the object that need to cause the feelings, for the feelings to qualify as an emotion. And that's what, according to some people, doesn't happen. Call the view that those beliefs are necessary on the core side of the feelings cognitivism. People think, look, if you look at cognitivism, if you endorse cognitivism about emotions, these feelings that you have when you read fiction are the same feelings as you would have if you were having fear, but they don't qualify as fear because they are not caused by the right thing. So they call people who propose this, call that core of feelings and physiological changes quasi-emotions. They say, yeah, emotions is something broader. It's that plus the beliefs, say the belief that Dracula is dangerous, causing that. But since that thing is not there, if you take the core bit of the emotion, call that a quasi-emotion. And these people say, yeah, you're experiencing that, but these things are not being caused by beliefs about the properties of the object, in this case, the belief that Dracula is dangerous, and assuming this view about emotions, that they need to be caused by properties of the object, it follows that these things are not emotions. There's two ways of doing this. One is Greg Carey, the other one is Kendall Walton, but I'm going to skate over the details of this. There's two different ways. One of them says, well, it's caused by a different attitude. It's not belief. It's the attitude of make believe. And the other one says, no, it's the attitude of belief, but it's not the belief that Dracula is dangerous. It's the belief that make believedly Dracula is dangerous. I don't think it's going to matter for our purposes because both versions of this have the same problem. The problem is, all right, why should you believe, when you believe that, say, it is make believe that Dracula is dangerous, why should that make you feel in any particular way? Right? If you're in front of something that it is dangerous, a tiger or something, well, it doesn't seem surprising that then you have the feelings that we associate with fear. But if you believe that in some story there is some object that is dangerous, why should that elicit any feelings in you? It's fear, the feelings that we associate with fear. Why not the feelings that we associate with, I don't know, embarrassment? There doesn't seem to be any reason for thinking that the fact that something dangerous is happening in some story should cause any feelings in you. Okay, that's the problem for this thing. That fact, the fact that the feelings come up when you have this, the belief that in the story there is this thing that is dangerous, that seems like a brute fact on this view. So because of that, some people have explored a different possibility, which is challenging 3, and saying 3 is way too strong. And forget about fiction. What we need to do is give you examples where 3 is false, that don't have anything to do with fiction. And then if we can convince you that 3 is false for reasons that don't have anything to do with fiction, when you get to the paradox of fiction, you just say, well, you have a problem here because 3 is way too strong. That's it. There's nothing special about fiction. So, by the way, this is the standard response to the paradox of fiction in the literature. Most people are here in this category. And one way of doing this is to say this, I think it's a misnomer, but people call this thought theory, because the position is it's enough to think about something terrible for you to experience an emotion. You don't need to believe that the thing you're thinking about is real. As long as it's terrible, you will experience the emotion. I think it's a misnomer because by thinking is a cognitive state. Doesn't need to involve any phenomenology at all. They probably mean imagining, visualizing, but whatever. So the idea, I'll give you an example. The idea is something like this. Suppose that I think in a very vivid way that my sister has this baby who is sick, has a terrible illness, is suffering horribly, and is going to die. It's going to happen tonight. Okay? If I think about that vividly enough, they say, you're going to experience distress. You're going to experience anguish. You're going to experience sadness. Even if you know very well that your sister doesn't have a baby. But if you can picture a situation in which she has a baby, and these horrible things are happening to the baby. Oh no, you can put in there anything you want. You can imagine somebody's torturing the baby or mistreating the baby or abusing the baby in any way. Then you're going to feel anger too and so on. Even if you know very well that this baby doesn't exist. So they think, all right, if you can do that sitting here, then what's so strange about engaging with fiction? Same thing is happening in fiction. You don't need that. So the problem here, they say, is that that thing is way too strong. You don't need that. And I just gave you an example where you don't have that belief. Why should fiction be anything? Other people do this in a more complicated way. So Jennifer Robinson has this book on emotion, mostly on emotion, a little bit on fiction, but it's mostly on emotion, where her view is emotions are processes rather than states. So they're state causally related. And the first state that happens in an emotion is the appraisal of something in a certain way. Appraisal is an evaluation of something in a certain way. So if you're next to a tiger or something, you're going to appraise that thing as dangerous, right? Then the next state is these physiological and phenomenological changes that we were talking about, that the quasi-emotion people say it's not an emotion, it's the core beat of the emotion. All right. And then the third state is, if you have time before you need to react, then you will cognitively monitor the situation and go, okay, is this really dangerous or not? Or is this an illusion? Or do I need to investigate more? But typically what happens is you get the appraisal, you get the phenomenological and physiological changes, and you react. And from an evolutionary point of view, it's a good thing that we do that, because sometimes the cost of not reacting is too high. Whereas the cost of reacting when the thing in front of you is not dangerous, it's very low. So we are designed in such a way that emotions on her view are caused by these evaluations that are very perceptual, instinctive. They're not cognitive. You don't have time to form the belief. If you had to form the belief, it would be way too late. The tiger would have eaten you already. Okay? So her example is you're walking in the woods, you step on a twig, makes a crackling sound. When you hear the sound, which could be a snake, before you evaluate whether or not, before you form any beliefs about the properties of the thing of which you may be afraid, you're going to be afraid. Why? Because that will make you jump away before then you evaluate and you believe whether or not there is a snake there. So if this view is correct, her point is when you look at fiction, it's something similar. You appraise Dracula as dangerous. That doesn't need a belief, just like the case of the snake doesn't need the belief. Now, very different views, but I think both of them have the same problem, which is this is a way of conceding that what you have when you engage with fiction is an emotion. Yeah? And this is why these people don't have, I'll emphasize this in a moment, they don't have the problem that the first people, the quasi-emotion people have. Namely, why would you have these feelings that you associate with fear when you believe that make-believedly Dracula is dangerous? They think, well, it's normal that you have these feelings. It is a genuine emotion. It's not some other strange psychological state. It's an emotion that you have. It's just that emotions don't require these feelings. The problem then is, okay, if you're really having an emotion, why aren't you behaving as if you had the emotion? If you're really afraid of Dracula, why aren't you trying to warn Harker about the impending danger? Why aren't you grabbing a crucifix? Why aren't you wrapping some garlic around your neck? Why aren't you, I don't know, putting the book down at least? You're doing none of that. You're not behaving in the ways in which you behave when you believe, well, when you are afraid. Forget about beliefs, when you're afraid of something. At the very least, when you're afraid of something, you try to avoid it. You're not trying to avoid Dracula. You're like there, reading more and more, This seems odd. Now, the point that I was just making passing. So what you can see now is that, probably you already got a sense of this, is that there's a certain trade-off between the two positions, the two that are non-starters, namely challenging 1 or challenging 3. If you challenge 1, if you say, you don't really have emotions towards fictional characters, you have these other things called quasi-emotions, the core of the feelings and physiology, okay? But no, maybe no motivation to act, maybe no beliefs following that. But you have that feeling and that physiology involved in emotion. Well, if you believe that, then you don't have any problem explaining why don't you behave as if you're having an emotion? Well, because you're not having an emotion. It's simple as that. So it's not strange that I'm not trying to put garlic on my neck or something. I'm not really afraid of Dracula on this view. So why should I be trying to avoid Dracula, protect myself from Dracula? But the problem is this one. Why does it feel to you like you're afraid of Dracula? It's like, and the response is, oh, because those core feelings are there, but that seems ad hoc. It's like, where did they come from? The belief is not the belief that Dracula is real. The belief upon these people is the belief that in the story, Dracula is dangerous. Why should that cause you any feelings whatsoever? Now, the other position, Robinson, for instance, and people who, example of the baby and so on, they have the opposite due to some problems. They don't have a problem in explaining why is it that it doesn't feel, that it feels to you as if you have an emotion, because you are having an emotion. They concede that just like in the forest, when you step on the twig, you are afraid before you get time to believe whether or not there's something dangerous there. Well, when you read fiction, it's the same according to that. So they don't have an issue here, but they have an issue with, well, why don't you behave as if you are afraid then? Why are you trying to avoid it? So what I'm hoping that it's coming across by now is that a lot is going to depend on what your view is of emotions. So you've got something that is not in dispute. There's these physiological changes, these phenomenological changes. Everybody agrees that you have that. But then there's these other things like beliefs about the property of the object causing that. Motivation to act being caused by those physiological and phenomenological changes. And there's different people who disagree about which of those are necessary for emotion. Yeah? You can even look at this in a functional way and think, the input part of the functional role of the state would be cognitive things that needs to be part of the emotion. There's people who they call this the motivational theory of emotion. They think unless it motivates you to act, that thing is not an emotion, even if you have the core feelings of physiology. And then there's people like old school classical philosophers who think as long as you have the core of the feelings, you have the emotion. Now, what I don't want to do is to go down the rabbit hole and try to now argue about what's an emotion, what's not an emotion. Because you can see here that you push in the slide of, oh, let's require the belief. Then you're going to be okay. You're going to end up here, and then you're going to have that problem. And if you push towards, well, let's require the motivational aspect of motivation to action, then you're going to have this problem. So instead of doing that, what I want to do is try to propose a solution to the paradox that is neutral. So this is what I have. That is neutral on what emotions are. It's not going to depend, if what I do now is successful, it's not going to depend on your views about emotions. You could be a cognitivist and think that the beliefs causing the emotion are required for that to count as an emotion. I should have said, the beliefs causing the feelings are required for that complex thing to count as an emotion. You could be a motivational theorist of emotion and believe that the feelings need to cause you to act, or at least be disposed to act. For that whole thing to be an emotion, you could be somebody Locke or Hume who thinks as long as you have the core feelings, you have the emotion. Either way, the solution should work. Now, how is that going to be possible? There is a cost. Full disclosure, it's not that easy. There is a problem to try to achieve this, and the problem will come at the end. I'll tell you about it at the end. But the broad strategy of how to do this is going to be like this. Essentially, it's going to be a version of rejecting the idea that we have emotions towards fictional characters. But it's not going to be because, like, say, Kendall Walton or like Greg Carey, it's not going to be because the psychological state that you occupy is not an emotion. It's going to be because I'm going to say, well, the thing that may or may not be an emotion is not even something that you occupy. You're in a different relation to that mental state. It's not a mental state you are the bearer of, the subject of. So roughly something like this. When we engage with fiction, we do have some psychological states, namely imagining. You're imagining things. That, I'm going to say, is correct. So when you imagine the scene with Dracula, you have a certain imagining. And imagining is going to be an episode of imagination. That's all we do. Now, those are about certain experiences that you have formed in your mind. The about is important. So you have two mental states now. One is the imagining. The other one is a certain experience that you have formed in your mind. And the imagining is about that. Okay? It's a higher order mental state. It's like the smoker who wants to stop having the desire to smoke has a higher order desire, right? So the imagining is like that. The imagining is about the experience. Okay? And I'm happy to concede that those experiences may include or may entail emotions. So these experiences are going to be like mental images that allow you to visualize a scene, like the scene with Dracula and Harker, but also they may include or entail feelings. Like it may be part of this experience, not only that you can see something or hear, maybe you could hear Dracula talk, but also how you would feel if you were there seeing the scene. Okay? And then, because it includes these feelings, you may think, oh, those things are emotions. Okay, let's say they do. Let's say they are emotions. Even if these experiences entail emotions, the main point is going to be this. I'll repeat this later, but the main point is going to be this. You don't have those experiences that you formed in your minds when you engage with fiction. You have other mental states, namely imaginings, that are about those experiences. In the same way in which, the smoker who, instead of wanting to smoke, they would prefer to a drink of water or something every time that they want to smoke. They wish they wanted a drink of water. Well, there's a desire for a drink of water that they're entertaining in their minds, but they're not having that desire. Right? They wish they did, but they don't have it. It's something like that. There's a certain experience that you are entertaining in your mind by having another mental state, namely imagining, which is about that. But you don't have the experience. That's going to be the deal. I mean, right now I'm just throwing claims at you. Now I need to convince you that this is true. And this is where the theory of the imagination comes in. How long have we been going on for?
30 minutes.
30 minutes? Okay. And we have an hour and a half total?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is where the theory of the imagination comes in, is to try to convince you that what I just said is correct, that's the way, that's what happens with imagination and fiction. So forget about fiction for a moment. Now, what I want to do is try to convince you of a general view about the imagination, that it will apply in the particular case of fiction, but it will apply to other cases. And if the view is correct, then you'll see that what I was just telling you a moment ago about fiction is the way in which we should understand what's happening in the paradox. So the view is what I call the counterfactual view of imagination, because the main claim is that the content of an imaginative episode is a counterfactual proposition. It's a proposition of the kind, if P were the case, Q would be the case. Okay? Always. So what I'm talking about here is sensory imagination. So it's not the kind of imagination that we have when you make believe that something is the case. Right? You imagine you're playing different roles, I don't know, actors in a stage. They imagine that they are Macbeth or whatever, because they make believe that they're Macbeth. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about pretending. I'm not talking about supposing when you are like doing a logical proof and you go, imagine that P is the case, then what would follow? Like, well, that's supposing that P is the case, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what you have in your head when you imagine something in a quasi-perceptual way. You have some experience in your mind that allows you to visualize something, okay? Visualize when it is a visible state of affairs, but you could imagine a symphony or something by having a mental image where you would be able to sort of hear sounds. All right. Now, the view is imagining something in this sense, not in the sense of pretending or supposing or make-believe, in the sensory sense. Imagining something is simulating what it would be like to experience it, to witness it, to perceive it, okay? To be there and see that it's happening. Now, what it would be like for whom? In the simple cases, it's going to be for you, the person doing the imagining. But there's some more complicated cases that I'm going to talk about too, at the end, where you're simulating what it would be like for somebody else to experience this. So let's introduce the view with the simple cases. For every subject, experience, and proposition, if the subject tries to imagine that the proposition is the case, and as a result, they form a certain experience in their mind, then what the subject imagines is that if they perceive that state of affairs, that proposition being the case, then having that perception would be for the subject like having this experience. So you imagine, imagine that there's a blue elephant waiting outside the door, right? You try to imagine that there's a blue elephant waiting outside the door, and you form a certain mental image in your mind of a blue elephant sitting there on the, next to you in the room out there. What you're imagining, the view is, what you're imagining, properly speaking, is this counterfactual. If you were outside seeing a blue elephant, this, the mental image that you formed in your mind, this is what it would be like for you to see that blue elephant sitting up there. That's the view. You can give me anything, I don't know. Imagining that your favorite, I don't know, Barcelona Soccer Club wins the Champions League, and then I form a certain mental image in my head of them winning. Of course, that should be a favorite. What it is, what you're imagining is if you were there seeing that they're winning the Champions League, that is what it would look like for you to see that. And then you can get it right or wrong, because that counterfactual could be true or false. It could be that if you were there, I don't know, it would be so noisy that you wouldn't be able to hear any of the things that you think you would be able to hear. All right. Now, for the case of fiction, how would that work? Well, the idea is if I try to imagine that Dracula is conversing with Harker, and I form a certain experience in my mind, as a result of doing that, then what I imagine is this. If I witness the conversation, if I was there in the castle, next to the fire or something, then witnessing the scene would be, for me, like having this mental image that I've just formed in my mind. So a lot is going to depend on what in that mental image. So I said this in passing before, I'm going to emphasize this because a lot is packed into that experience. So these experiences that you form in your mind when you imagine something is a mental image, because in virtue of forming that experience in your mind, you visualize a certain scene. So there's quasi-perceptual features of it, right? You seem to see a scene, you seem to hear what's going on in there and so on. But there's also affective features. It would feel in a particular way if you were there witnessing the scene. So these experiences are not only the experience of seeing something, it's the experience of witnessing, like seeing it and how you would feel if you were seeing it. There may be sensations, there may be emotions involved in that. You know, if I was there in the Dracula castle by the fire, maybe I would have a sensation of warmth because I'm standing there by the fire. Okay, so it's not just seeing something; it's how you would feel when you are there witnessing it. Oh, now that's very important because some of those feelings are going to be the feelings that we associate with emotions. Now, what kinds of things can I say to convince you that this view is right? I can say two things. One is that it accounts for two kinds of error in imagination. I'll walk you through some examples in a moment, but the two types of error are this. One is what we could call misidentification errors. These are errors that happen when you try to imagine something and you form a certain experience as a result of trying to imagine it, but the thing as you visualize it doesn't happen. It may happen, but not as you visualize it, okay? And the other one is what I call prediction errors, where it's kind of the same thing, but the reason why it doesn't happen as you visualize it is because in the misidentification case, you had a wrong belief about what it would look like. In the prediction case, it's just that it simply doesn't happen for whatever reason. So one example, for instance, of misidentification error, Bernard Williams has this example. I'm an anarchist who's going to I'm imagining that I'm assassinating the prime minister, and I wrongly believe that the prime minister is Lord Salisbury. When I form this mental image of me assassinating Lord Salisbury, am I imagining that I'm assassinating the prime minister? Well, you are, because that's what you were trying to imagine, but are you imagining it correctly? Seems like the answer is no. Prediction errors. So there's this example by Amy Kind of Olaf in Frozen, who's like imagining that he's in summer and how wonderful it would be to be sunbathing in summer with sunglasses and having a drink by the beach. Is Olaf imagining that he is in summer? Well, yeah, that's what he's trying to imagine. So what else could he be imagining? Is he imagining it correctly? Well, not really. If he was there in summer, it would be melting. I'll give you a couple of other examples in a moment. But these are the kinds of examples that I think the counterfactual view can give you an account of how they happen. Now, the second reason has to do with, I told you before that in some cases, the simulation that you do when you imagine something is not the simulation of what it would be like for you to witness it. It's a simulation of what it would be like for somebody else to experience that thing. So there's a different puzzle about, has nothing to do with emotion, but it does have to do with imagination, which is the puzzle of what is it that you do when you imagine, when you try to imagine that, say, you are somebody else doing something, that you're Napoleon seeing Waterloo, okay? You try to imagine that you're Napoleon seeing Waterloo, you form a certain experience in your mind, a mental image of the field of battle, the proprioceptive experience of you being on top of a horse that is moving, the affective, the feelings of feeling, I don't know, resolute and in command and decisive and so on. What is it that you're doing? Is it possible for you to imagine that you're being Napoleon in Waterloo correctly? Looks like the answer should be yes. But there are reasons to think that that cannot be right, because imagination, conceivability is a guide to possibility, and you cannot be Napoleon. You're different from Napoleon, you're different from Napoleon necessarily. It's impossible for you to be identical with Napoleon. So what is it that you're doing exactly when you imagine that you're being someone else? It can't be that. It can't be literally that you are that person, because that's impossible. And imagination is supposed to be a guide to possibility. So another virtue of the counterfactual view is that it can give you a solution to this puzzle as well. I'll get to that. I'm running out of time, but I'll try to get to that. So misidentification errors, here's an example. I call it junior fireman. John has taken a new job at the Oxfordshire Fire Brigade. I don't even know whether there is such a thing. Let's pretend that there is. And he decides to take a tour of Oxford University to familiarize himself with the location of its various buildings. During the tour guide stops at Cat Street and points at Hertford College, but John cannot hear what he's saying. However, he overhears another member of the tour, another member in the group, talking about New College. And he believes incorrectly that they're in front of New College. A week later, John's boss asked the team where they would go if the fire station got a call alerting the team that New College is on fire. He forms a mental image of the building at which the tour guide was pointing, being on fire, and he says, well, he could drive the engine to Cat Street. That's where the group was. John thinks that he's accurately imagining that New College is on fire, but John's boss tells him that this cannot be right, since New College is not on Cat Street. So is he imagining the New College is on fire? Well, yeah, imagination is up to you, right? If that's what he wants to imagine, that's what he's imagining. Is he imagining it correctly? No. Looks like the answer is no. Now, the counterfactual view can take care of that intuition, the intuition that he's not imagining it correctly. The intuition is that John's imagining is inaccurate. The view predicts this. Why does the view predict this? Because if the view is right, what John imagines is seeing New College on fire would be for me like having this experience that I'm entertaining. And that experience is the mental image of this building at which the tour guide was pointing being on fire. But that building is the wrong building. Seeing New College on fire would not be like having that experience because it's the wrong building. So John's imagining turns out to be incorrect. The counterfactual is wrong. If New College was on fire and he was seeing New College on fire, it would not be for him like seeing the building that the tour guide was pointing at on fire. Prediction errors, so like the Olaf case, here's a different example. So I call it well-intentioned parent. Paul's daughter Mia is about to turn 6 years old. Paul wants to buy her a birthday present that she's going to be thrilled by and decides to buy her a dollhouse as big as a bicycle. Mia, however, is really hoping for a new bicycle. On the eve of Mia's birthday, Paul wraps the dollhouse up on red paper, leaves it in the living room, and tries to imagine, so this is what he tries to imagine Mia opening her present in the morning. He forms a mental image of Mia ripping up the red paper and looking thrilled as she discovers the giant dollhouse. As it happens in the morning, Mia sees the present the size of her bicycle, quickly unwraps the present, and discovers the dollhouse. She cannot hide her profound disappointment. Thus, Paul thought on the eve of Mia's birthday that he was accurately imagining Mia opening her birthday present. But he was wrong, since Mia is not happy at all when she opens it. So was Paul imagining that Mia is opening her birthday present? Well, yeah, that's what the mental image seems to be a mental image of. Is he imagining it accurately? No, it doesn't look like it, because that's not what it happens. In fact, something in the mental image, in particular, that she looks thrilled, is not what it happens. Opening the present does happen. All right. Now, the counterfactual view can take care of this as well. The intuition is that Paul's imagining is incorrect. The counterfactual view predicts this, predicts that the imagining is incorrect. Why? Because if the view is right, what Paul imagines is this counterfactual. Seeing Mia would be, if I saw Mia opening her present, that would be for me like having this mental image that I have formed in my mind. Now, is that true or false? It's false, right? Seeing Mia opening her present would not look like having that experience. Why? Because seeing Mia opening the present does not, in fact, look like that. The experience that he has formed is a mental image of Mia being happy with her present, and that's not what actually happens. So Paul's imagining turns out to be inaccurate, which is what you want. So I think it's a virtue of the counterfactual view that it can take care of these errors. Now, what I haven't told you is, are there any other views about the imagination that can do this? Different paper. So I won't bore you with this, but my position is no, there are other views that can do one or they can do the other, but they cannot do both at the same time, right? But if you're interested in this, we can talk about this in the Q&A. Now, the other reason, Napoleon. So I told you there's a separate reason for thinking that the counterfactual view of imagination is right. And I gave you a little preview of how it works. something like this. Suppose, here's a puzzle, different puzzle, not the paradox of fiction, something entirely different. Suppose that I try to imagine that I'm Napoleon at seeing Waterloo, and as a result, I form an experience E in my mind. Mental image of the battlefield, hearing, I don't know, the cannons roaring and the guards charging and seeing the smoke of gunfire and, I don't know, having the proprioceptive experience of being on top of the horse, sensation of being on top of the horse, feeling in command and decisive and resolute. Is it possible for me to get it right? Could I be imagining it correctly? Intuitively, the answer seems to be yes, right? There seems to be a fact of the matter. I mean, maybe like I'm imagining it from a visual perspective that is way too high on top of the horse for Napoleon's statue. Given that he was very short, I went way too high, you know? But maybe not. Maybe because I'm short myself, I got it exactly right. So it's possible for me to get it right. Maybe he didn't sleep that night. And the proprioceptive sensation of being on top of the horse would be really uncomfortable in a way that I haven't built into this experience E. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's exactly how I imagine it to be. Right? So the answer seems to be you could be getting it right. But that doesn't seem possible for you to get it right because conceivability is supposed to be a guide to possibility. So if you could be imagining Napoleon seeing Waterloo correctly, then it should be possible for you to be Napoleon at Waterloo. And that is not possible. If you're not Napoleon, then you're not Napoleon necessarily. It's impossible for you to be Napoleon. Seeing Waterloo or doing anything else. So you have here another inconsistent triad, right? You have three claims again. This one, and the one that says, oh, I'm imagining that I'm Napoleon seeing Waterloo. One of them has to go. And the proposal is, yeah, you're not really imagining that you are Napoleon seeing Waterloo. What you're imagining, and then you can rescue the intuition that you're doing something that could turn out to be right, is a counterfactual. It's not an identity statement. It's a counterfactual. The counterfactual is, if Napoleon himself was experiencing Waterloo, then seeing it would be for him, not for you, for him, like having that mental image, that experience that you have formed in your mind. And then you may be getting it right or wrong, depending on what exactly Napoleon experienced in the past. But at least, even if you can get it wrong, at least it gives you a way of reading the thing at the top. I imagine that I'm Napoleon seeing Waterloo. That doesn't make that impossible when you put it together with those two plates over there, with the two bullet points. So the counterfactual view gives you a way out of this puzzle. Again, is it the only view that gives you a way out of these puzzles? No, it isn't. But let's not go into, the problems for the views that give you alternative ways of doing this. By now, what I hope I've done is to convince you that the counterfactual view of the imagination is not crazy. It's a reasonable view. There's strong reasons for believing that the view is right. So now comes the interesting bit. Suppose it's right. Does it help you with the paradox of fiction too? And I think the answer is yes. Let's go back to the point. That inconsistent triad, the first claim was, we have emotions towards fictional characters when we engage with fiction. Well, do we? According to this view, when we engage with fiction, what we have is imaginings. You have episodes of imagination. And if the counterfactual view is right, when I imagine the scene with Dracula, I form a certain experience in my mind, the experience of seeing Dracula, the experience of feeling the warmth of the fire near me, the experience of feeling like I'm in the presence of Dracula, probably feeling like really, having the feelings that you would associate with being afraid, you form that experience in your mind. And what they're imagining is, if I witnessed the scene, if I was there in the castle with them, then being there, witnessing the scene would be for me like having that experience that I have formed in my mind. And as I told you in passing, I'm conceiving that part of having this experience would be feeling afraid. Okay? That imagining is a mental state that you occupy, that you have, that you are the bearer of, that you undergo, but it's not an emotion, it's an imagining. Okay? So if there is an emotion here that you're having when you engage with fiction, it must be one of the other two mental states here. One is the imagining, There's three mental states involved in the engagement with fiction. One is the imagining that you have with a counterfactual content. The other one is the mental state in the antecedent of the counterfactual content, witnessing. And the other one is the mental state in the consequence of the counterfactual experiencing. So if one of them is an emotion that you're having, it must be either the witnessing or that experiencing. Obviously, the promising candidate is experience E, but let's get the witnessing out of the way. If you did witness the thing, of course that would entail feeling emotions, right? If you were there in the castle, you would be afraid of Dracula, sure. But you're not actually witnessing the thing. So the witnessing cannot be the emotion that you're feeling. It's a different kind of mental state, and it's not a mental state that you're having. The promising candidate seems to be the experience that you have formed in your mind. Right? Now, this experience has intentional features. It locates objects in space, in virtue of which, by entertaining this experience, by forming it in your mind, you can visualize the scene. It also has phenomenal features, in virtue of which, by entertaining the experience, you're presented with what it would be like for you to see the scene. So, just like in the case of Napoleon, there were the feelings of feeling resolute and in command, that maybe a little bit in awe of the whole scene. In the case of Dracula, there will be the sensation of warmth by the fire, but also there's going to be the feelings that you associate with being afraid. But if you were there next to Dracula, it scared the Jesus out of you. So the feelings involved may amount to the emotion of fear, may, depending on your view about emotions. Right? If you're a cognitivist, no, they don't. If you're a motivational theorist of emotions, no, they don't. If you're a sentimentalist, yes, they do. Let's put that aside and say, okay, suppose for the sake of the argument that it does involve an emotion. Okay? Suppose it does. Even if that experience that you have formed in your mind entails fear, you're not actually afraid of Dracula when you have the imagining. Why? Well, for the particular reason why you don't actually see Dracula when you have the imagining. Right? You're imagining Dracula, you're having this mental image that is the mental image that similar to a perceptual experience that you would have if you saw Dracula. Are you seeing Dracula? No, you're not seeing Dracula, right? Same reason why you're not afraid of Dracula. The reason is the same, you don't have the experience. You're having another mental state, the imagining, which is about the experience. Now, to try to sell you this idea, to try to motivate the idea that this is the correct way of thinking about this experience that you're having when you, the experience that you have formed in your mind when you engage with fiction. Think about it this way. Don't think about fiction for a moment, and think about cases that don't have to do with fiction. If you imagine that your hand is getting burned because you left it on top of the stove or something, and you didn't realize that the stove was on, imagine that. You really want to imagine it vividly, you need to form a certain burning sensation in your mind, which you are able to do, right? Because you felt things burning before. Okay. Now, when you do that, does your hand thereby feel burned? No, right? Your hand doesn't burn when you imagine that you've left it on top of the stove and it was on. Even when you form that experience of having a certain burning sensation in your hand. Just the fact that you're imagining doesn't thereby make it the case that your hand feels burnt. Why? What the answer? So the question is why? Why doesn't it? Well, because that burning sensation that you formed in your mind is not something you are having. You're just entertaining what it would be like for you to have that, but you're not having it. Imagine that, you know, okay, forget about imagination. This happens in other cases too. Memory. Remember the first time that you fell down from your bicycle while you were trying to learn how to ride the bicycle, and it hurt. You try to remember vividly how it hurt. You're forming a certain pain sensation in your mind. Does it hurt when you remember falling down from the bicycle? The answer is no. But, you know, but those feelings are there. You're entertaining them. They're present to your mind. You're aware of them, but you're not having them. It doesn't hurt to remember falling down from the bicycle. It hurts when you fell down from the bicycle, but to remember falling down from the bicycle doesn't hurt. So it's the same thing. It's the idea that there's two mental states. One of them is the imagining, the other one is the experience that you would have if you were in front of Dracula. That may involve an emotion. But this one, the imagining is about that. You're not having this one, you're having this one. You're having the higher order experience. The person who, I don't know, the person who hates coriander, the taste of coriander, but because they're a chef and they, need to taste coriander a lot, they wish that because they're cooking with coriander all the time, they wish that they liked coriander. They have a desire, but the taste of coriander, they wish they enjoyed that taste. They can, form in their minds the experience of enjoying the taste of coriander. Are they thereby liking it? Well, no, they wish they liked it, but they don't have that experience. They just imagine themselves having it. So if this is correct, then in imagination, you're entertaining, you're imagining something about these experiences that you form in your mind. In the case of the hand, about the burning sensation. But you imagine that if you left your hand on top of the stove, that would be for you like having this burning sensation. But you don't have the burning sensation. So that maybe I didn't emphasize this enough. Why is this a solution to the paradox? It's not because this experience E may or may not be an emotion. I'm neutral on that. Even if it's an emotion, the solution is that that's not something you have. That's something that you just entertain by imagining. If I was there in the castle, listening to Dracula, this is what it would be for me to be there. And that this may involve emotion. But you're not having that thing. All right. Now, let's get to the problem. And then with this, I'm finished. The problem is, I told you before that all positions that consist in rejecting one don't have a problem, don't have an issue here, because why don't you behave as, why am I not putting the book down? Well, because I'm not having the emotion. So I don't behave as if I was afraid because I'm not afraid. That's not an issue. The issue is, hold on, you told us that Kendall Walton and Greg Carey and those people say that you believe that it's make-believe that Dracula is dangerous, and that causes certain feelings in you. You were accusing them of, well, that's ad hoc. That's a brute fact that it causes those feelings. So why don't you have the same problem here? And I do think I have the same problem. So this is what I would say in response to the challenge is, all right, so according to you, you don't have the emotion, you're there reading the book, you're not afraid of Dracula, why does it feel to you as if you were afraid of Dracula? And what I would say in response to this is something like, well, the feelings, just like in memory, when you remember falling down from your bike, the pain sensation is in some way present to your mind. You can hold it before your mind, as it were. You can entertain it. In that sense, these emotions are there, present to your mind. They're immediately available to you. In the same way in which when you remember, I don't know, falling in love for the first time, what it felt like, is not something you're now experiencing when you remember that. Otherwise, it would be very easy to be in love all the time. But those feelings, it makes a difference to the phenomenology of what you're remembering, right? Now, you can push me on this. So somebody could say, you're not telling us much about this relation, right? We should know more about what is for this relation to be before your mind in some way, immediately available to you. The question is whether the person who is engaged in this kind of project needs to give you an account of that. So that relation is basically a relation of what people call acquaintance sometimes. And there's many different views about what acquaintance is. So I think what I need to do is not so much give you a theory of acquaintance for this to work, but just convince you that it is that relation, whatever that relation ultimately consists in, which is responsible for the fact that you feel as if you were afraid of that. I think it is, but anyway, I'll be interested in knowing what you guys think. So thanks for your attention.
Okay, pretty